we do have a very large pig production, and we really have some very hyper prolific sows. So we have a very high efficiency in the sows, but we also see that we have some issues still. For instance, with the sow mortality is very high in Denmark, and it's not going down. We also had problems with piglet mortality. So I think we still have some issues related to how we manage feeding and nutrition of the sows in order to also help solve these problems.
Good day. This is another interesting session of the Swine podcast show in Canada. My name is Anja Strathe, University of Alberta, and with me I have Dr. Anja Strathe, who is an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. Welcome, Anja.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I'm looking forward to this session where we'll talk about a few items that are associated with swine feeding and nutrition. So to just kickstart our conversation, why is the topic of swine feeding and nutrition important in Denmark?
Well, we do have a very large pig production, and we really have some very hyper prolific sows. So we have a very high efficiency in the sows, but we also see that we have some issues still. For instance, with the sow mortality is very high in Denmark, and it's not going down. We also had problems with piglet mortality. So I think we still have some issues related to how we manage feeding and nutrition of the sows in order to also help solve these problems.
Could you perhaps provide some insights into what is the level of piglets born or weaned per sow in Denmark right now? And when you talk about high mortality, what would be some numbers there?
Yeah, well, for the sows in average have above almost 19 piglets in average total born, but we also have some that have much higher levels. And for we do have some that are very good at managing. So we actually have farms that wean like 45 piglets per sow per year, which is quite high. But we also have farms with very high mortalities where the mortality is between 15 and 20%, which is very high. It has been changed now. It's going down again because they have changed also the breeding program to try to help the problem about piglet mortality. But we still have a very high mortality in the sow, which in average is around 16% of the sows, which is really high. And especially what is seen for the sows is that many of the sows that are culled due to leg problems or hoof problems. And then the other part of the sows that we see that are dying on the farms are usually dying just around farrowing. So we can see that there must be something that is really where we are pushing the sows too much, maybe around farrowing, which is also I think is quite interesting, related to find some solutions related to the nutrition and feeding of the sows.
Yeah, those are very impressive production numbers. So if we then focus on the piglets themselves, is it possible to change nutrition of the sow and thereby increase piglet birth weight in case that is a contributing factor to piglet mortality?
Yes, because we would very much like to have, larger piglet at birth, because then we would probably also decrease mortality, because we know that piglet birth weight is really correlated to the mortality of the piglet. So it would be nice if we'd not had all the piglets weighing below 700 or 800 grams, because they really take a lot of management to make them survive, even though it's possible. I have done quite a lot of trials on the gestating sows where the focus was to increase piglet birth weight. So we looked at, for instance, B vitamins. We have looked at different antioxidants like organic zinc and selenium and vitamin C. We have also looked into something that is anti-inflammatory, like omega-3 fatty acids in the diet. And also we all specifically looked into methionine to see if that had any effect. And we had done several trials with the omega-3 fatty acids, both in early and during entire gestation. But I mean, we don't really see, for some of the studies, we do increase the individual birth weight a bit, like with 30, 40, 70 grams, which is also something. And for some of them, we also did see, for instance, for the omega-3 fatty acids, that we had fewer of the very small piglets in the litter. So it's possible to do a little bit, but I don't think we have found really the thing that really moves it a lot. What we also see, because we would also like to see a smaller variation within the litter, because it's nice to have more, have all the piglets in a more similar size. And here, I must say, I don't think we can do anything, because we have made like 5 or 6 trials in different farms, and every time we actually have a variation within the litter that is 300 grams plus minus 5 grams. It's the same number every time. So I don't think we can do anything about the variation, but we might be able to increase the average birth weight slightly if we find the right things to look at. Yeah.
Okay, so then the strategies that you mentioned, like the vitamins and the omega-3 fatty acids, did you apply that throughout gestation or just through the final third or quarter? How did you do your research?
Yeah, for some of the studies, we actually only looked in early gestation, because we had an idea that, I mean, that the variation and the smaller piglets, and we can see that it's probably already established quite early in gestation. So we did this study where we only looked at fetal development to see what was actually going on in these hyperprolific sows. And we could see that already at day 28 of gestation, we actually had these very small fetuses only weighing 1 gram, but some of them were already smaller, and they also had a smaller placenta. So we had an idea, if we could do something early, then we might help it off, but we didn't see great effects on placental development and piglet birth weight. For instance, the omega-3 fatty acids, we have done studies both looking at only early gestation, but also feeding through the entire cycle, and also not really seeing any effect. We did see effects on some of the immune parameters of the sows, for instance, cytokines. So we might have improved something there, but not enough to pay off on the birth weight. So yeah, I think it's quite difficult, but yeah.
So that means in early gestation there is already some very important events happening.
Yes.
That may determine a chance of success with changing birth weight throughout the rest of gestation.
Yeah, and we actually looked into also doing a feeding trial where we looked at even earlier, because this variation might have been established already before mating, when we have egg maturation already in the fairing unit. So we also did a study where we looked into feeding with glycogenic diets. So we had high levels of glucose in the diets 1 week before mating. And very surprisingly, we did not see any effect on birth weight, but we actually did see an effect on litter size. So it was actually increased from 22 to 23 piglets. So we did do something to piglet survival, or the very early embryo survival, which could have something to do with the maturation of eggs before mating. But I mean, we were not aiming at getting more piglets, so that was not really. But it was, I mean, still interesting. We could see that something was happening. But yeah.
Of course, the fetuses in utero, most of the growth of the fetuses is happening in the final trimester or
Yes.
the final 25% of gestation.
Yeah.
Have you looked at energy and particularly amino acid nutrition to see if increases in nutrients during that time period would help with increasing birth weight?
I have not, but we have done some industry trials in Denmark quite recently, looking into, for instance, using a flat feeding curve for the entire gestation period instead of increasing the level during the last third. And here they looked at if there was an effect on piglet birth weight by decreasing using the flat curve. And actually, they did not find any effect on the piglet birth weight. But what a small study from Aarhus University showed, that they have looked into if there is an effect on the protein supply during late gestation, if we have some kind of carryover effect, because we could get a negative impact on the mammary gland development in late gestation by lowering the amount of protein. So I think it's protein that we have to look into if we are not limiting the fetal development by going lower, because the sow is prioritizing the fetal development and the fetal growth, so they are probably getting what they require. But I think in relation to mammary gland development and the following milk production, we still need to figure out if we will see a negative impact of using the flat curve in late gestation on that. So that is quite interesting. We will hopefully be looking into that maybe next year. So yeah.
Do you think there will be a difference when you look at gilts that may not have a fully developed mammary gland versus multiparity cells relative to mammary development?
You could hypothesize that, because they are quite different, and the gilt are still at another stage of development, so they could have another requirement. But I'm not sure, because they do not have as high a milk production during their first lactation, but compared to the older sows, but they might still have some further development of the mammary gland besides getting ready for lactation, that also requires extra protein or amino acids. Yeah.
So you also made a comment about sow mortality being relatively high around farrowing. So I presume right before, during, or right after. Any link there that you have seen relative to nutrition?
Well, we are very interested in looking into transition feeding. That's quite new, but quite some farms are actually using a transition diet now that is fed from 1 week before farrowing and until 2 or 3 days after farrowing. And here I think it would be beneficial to look into if what's happening to these sows. Do they have a high level of, for instance, oxidative stress, or they also do see that some of them die from heart failure when they make autopsies. And some of these things could maybe be supported by nutrition. Yeah. So I think that's a very interesting area. I think it's an area that will grow a lot. Also in other countries, this area of transition feeding, very specifically related to, of course, getting a good farrowing process, but also making a better status of the sow. I think, if you could call that, a better health status around farrowing.
So then, relative to the farrowing process itself, are you thinking about having more rapidly available energy in the diet, so that there's more quickly available energy?
Yeah, actually, it's probably more available, more slow energy, because it's usually actually fiber that is increased in these transition diets compared to the lactation diet, because the sow will not eat during her gestation process through her farrowing process. Yeah, of course. So, a lot of studies were made on extra fiber and how that, because that will give some more slowly released energy from the short chain fatty acids from the fermentation in the hindgut. So that is actually what most transition diets are based on. It is having an increased level of fiber right now. And then the question is if we could put other things in there that would actually support the sows.
Okay. So then in Denmark, what types of fiber sources would you then think of to include in transition diets?
Well, I think one of the main fiber sources that we use is the sugar beet pellets in Denmark. That seem to work quite well. There is also some trials using more silage or wrap hay, something like that, but it's not easy to handle in all systems. So it is more the sugar beet pellets that are increased, and some of them also use oat or in the diet as well. Yeah.
So then sugar beet pulp, I translate that into fermentable fiber, very bulky fiber.
Yes.
And then do they then blend it into the diet, or do they top dress the diet that they're feeding?
It's blended into the diet. So, and it's also used in the gestation diet as a fiber source usually. So it's the same fiber source that is used. So yeah, it's blended within the diet to get that effect. Yeah.
So then this high fiber sugar beet pulp containing diet, of course, the last week of gestation, or do they already start earlier feeding this high fiber diet? And how do they then make the switch to a lactation diet?
I mean, they come from a gestation diet, which also have a quite high level of fiber, because we need to have that to ensure that they have some kind of level of satiety, because they are restrictedly fed during gestation. In the following lactation diet, there is also some level of sugar beet pellets. It's much lower, like maybe 1 or 2% of the diet. So it's the same type of fiber, and that's also what is recommended both for taste, but also sort of probably for the gut health of the animal. So we don't make big changes where there already is a lot of changes for the animal. So it's the same fiber source that go through all diets. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So when you then look at the lactation periods, what knowledge do we lack there that may perhaps help with solving sow mortality that might be related to lameness?
Yeah, it's a big problem. I mean, we made some very big studies on, for instance, organic trace minerals, where we tested different types of organic trace minerals. Many studies already have compared the organic versus inorganic and seen that they probably have a higher availability, and therefore also have a higher impact on health of the claws, but also on the legs of the animals. But I mean, in studies where we compared different sources of organic trace minerals, we actually did not see a big difference. But what we also realized was actually that the sows were already, when we started, because we made these different scorings of the claws, and was when we already started, they actually had quite bad claws. So I think now we actually put focus back on how to raise the gilts in order to get sows that have better claws, health, and better legs. So I think that's actually where we have put focus now on this as a part of trying to solve this problem with having sows with a lot of problems with legs, because it might already have been established during their rearing period.
Interesting. So then it's mostly the hoofs, I think you would call them, like
Hooves,
the
yeah,
bottom
yeah,
part of the legs where you
yes.
see the problems, or can there also be actually leg problems in the small part of the skeletal tissue?
Yeah, I think it's both, but it's a lot of hoof problems that is seen with too long hoofs, or they walk in a bad ways, and that's also probably a lot of about the management. If they actually trim the hoofs of the sows within the farms, that could probably also solve a lot if they had more focus on doing that in a regular basis and not just randomly sometimes during night when they just walk around there. So that's probably also part of it, to have more focus on that. This is actually important for the longevity of these sows.
If you then would switch to the piglets themselves, because you also mentioned piglet mortality is fairly high, or at least too high to your liking, what what nutritional solutions might you be looking there at for lactation or during lactation?
Yeah, well, my research do not really focus on how to feed the piglets. I have a lot of colleagues that do that. My sort of main area is actually that I would like to have the sows take care of the piglets. So my focus is also a lot on, can we do something through nutrition of the sow that improve either milk yield or milk quality of these piglets, so they have a better growth and thereby survival. And we have tried, I mean, many things. Some things work, some things don't. Right now, we're actually trying, are just finishing a dose response trial with the omega-3 fatty acids for lactating sows, to see if we get an effect there, maybe with a higher or better quality of the milk. Um, but there's, of course, as you've also mentioned, a lot of feeding strategies used for the piglets. I mean, in Denmark, I think that's probably also how it is in other countries. The piglets are offered some kind of creep feed already from maybe after the first week. Then they are offered creep feed to make them get used to the feed before weaning. Some farms also use these milk, supplying extra milk in a milk system within the pen. Um, And it depends a lot on what the price is for the piglets and the price, if they want to pay the price to get actually a very good milk supplement, because sometimes it's almost only water coming out and then it doesn't really make a difference. But it could make a difference if you have a very good milk supply there, because then a lot of farmers are making the sows take care of not only the number of piglets that they have functioning mammary glands, but it might be 16, 17, or 18 piglets that they can make the sows take care of instead of a lower number. Yeah.
So I presume you have a 28-day lactation in Denmark. So then with this high number of piglets that are suckling the sow, how do you manage then sow body weight losses, or the sow can maintain its body weight to support milk production?
Yeah, well, that is very much about how to manage the feeding curve. So it is about having the sows eat as much as possible. Which of course also is a balance, because there's also risk of the sows stop eating, especially during the first week where you have the increase in feed allowance. But it is about having them eat as much as possible. But there's really big variation between farms, because we see some farms where they actually go through lactation with almost no body weight loss, while others have body weight loss of 10 or 20 or 25 kilos. And then we have some farms with very high weight loss, which probably also is the farms where we do see that if the following reproduction is affected by that. So it is having them eat quite a lot.
So then these farms that you mentioned where body weight losses are basically not appearing, would you say that those farms are also then able to make those sows eat the most so that they don't lose weight? Is that the trick?
It could be, yeah. But they also, it could be. It really differs quite a lot, yeah. But one thing that we know is not a good idea is if the sows are, of course, they should not be too thin when they enter the farrowing unit, but the sows that are really fat, they will not eat anything when they go into the lactation unit. So that is really a problem. So they have put sort of a recommendation for how the level of back fat should be when they enter the farrowing unit, to have the optimal feed intake and milk production in the following lactation.
So in other words, management during gestation is critical for the sows to eat properly during lactation.
Yes, I think so, because there are so many carryover effects there.
So when you then look at well, you mentioned a little bit on creep feed. I was surprised to hear you already say 1 week after farrowing, creep feeding would already start. Is that true for all farms, or?
Between 7 and 10 days after farrowing, they offer it, but I'm not sure they eat a lot. But it's there, and they can explore, and they can try to eat a little bit. But I don't know how much they actually eat. I don't think it's a lot, but it's actually offered already from 7 to 10 days after farrowing. Yeah.
Okay. When you then look at your areas overall, where do you think that we actually have most lack of knowledge for feeding sows during gestation or lactation?
I think what I also is about to focus on in some future projects is this transition period, because this is here we see that the sows are really under high pressure. They have the late gestation period and then the farrowing process and transition into lactation. I think that's really where we lack a bit knowledge of what is actually putting the sows under pressure here. What is happening, and why do so many sows die just following lactation, in the beginning of lactation? I think that's a very important focus area.
Yeah, and then in that type of research, you want to look at blood parameters, or what do you think might be some pieces of finding out what is the problem?
Yeah, we'll probably do some blood sampling often to look at different parameters, for instance, levels of oxidative stress or inflammation, or maybe some other infections that could be seen around farrowing. it could also be looking sort of at the vitality of the piglets and see how they are doing just at birth, and also looking at the fairing duration. Is it sows that have long fairings or short fairings? What is affecting them?
Very interesting. Is there anything else you would like to add to what we have discussed? Anything else that is important relative to this topic?
I don't know. There's so many important things. Well, I think in Denmark and probably in the rest of the EU, we are also probably will go transition towards having sows that are also loose housed during lactation. And I think here we are already doing some experiments on farms that have those systems, but these sows might have some other requirements. They might move more around. They might have a higher milk production. We have different hypotheses because they are not crated. So I think that will also maybe take some time in the future to look more into if we need to change our requirements that are more suited to the new systems that we will have.
Maybe the final question, just as a follow-up, you mentioned on-farm research a couple of times during our conversation. How important is that for success in your research program, that you can actually do research on farms?
Well, it is the fact that University of Copenhagen we only have facilities for very intensive experiments. So almost all my research is done on farms. It's of course more challenging because there is a lot of things that you cannot control, but it's also very close to it is the reality. So I think I like to do applied research, so I think it gets closer to the farmers and the users of the results when you also do the work on farms. Yeah.
Interesting conversation. In case people would like to follow up and read something on the topic, do you have any favorite resource that you could direct our listeners to?
Yeah. Well, myself, I actually normally just use Google Scholar because I think it gives me sort of the newest research papers published. So that is probably, yeah, it might not be very, I don't know, but it's that's what I do.
It's the answer to a lot of our problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple to use, so that's why.
Well, that concludes another episode of the Swine podcast show in Canada. I've had with me Dr. Anja Strathe, and thank you very much for this conversation.
You're welcome. Thank you.